Shadows of steel. Deep brown hair flew in the breeze as Brietta narrowly avoided the plunging stake aimed for her heart. The wind rushed against her skin as the weapon whizzed by, barely missing its mark. With swift reflexes, she lifted her sword just in time to deflect another strike directed toward her face. The clash of silver against steel resonated in her ears, as Brietta strained to push back against her opponent, seeking an opportunity to counterattack. Brietta's focus was solely on Nicola's movements, her mother, the formidable warrior. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, but in her concentration, she neglected her footing. Nicola, ever so proficient, smoothly withdrew her stake, and with a swift motion, executed a clean sweep with her leg, sending Brietta tumbling to the ground. Thud! The impact left Brietta breathless, as she lay staring up at the bright sky. A familiar silhouette loomed over her, instinctively coaxing her into action. With a determined kick, she sent Nicola staggering back a few paces. Nicola quickly regained her footing, her expression revealing nothing as she examined the dusty mark on her dark attire, acknowledging the contact Brietta had made. For a fleeting moment, pride flickered in Brietta's heart. She had managed to touch the great Nicola. But the moment was short-lived. Nicola's face hardened, and they resumed their circling, each warrior waiting for the other's misstep. Brietta took a deep breath, trying to remain patient for that one critical opening. Nicola's eyes remained fixed on her daughter, focused and unwavering. In the blink of an eye, Nicola surged forward, a blur of black and white against the sunlit backdrop. She lunged, pressing both her speed and skill to pierce Brietta's defense. Brietta leaned to the right, avoiding the thrust, but soon the onslaught of strikes overwhelmed her. Balance faltered, and in a moment of panic, Brietta threw a punch aimed for Nicola's head. Nicola expertly intercepted, grasping Brietta's fist and twisting her wrist behind her back with lethal precision. A cry of pain escaped Brietta's lips as her sword clattered to the ground. The sharp pang radiated through her arm, and her face contorted in anguish. "I have to escape." With unwavering resolve, Brietta stomped firmly on Nicola's foot. A grunt of surprise escaped Nicola as her grip loosened, allowing Brietta the chance to pivot and flip her mother over. Seizing the moment, Brietta sprinted back to retrieve her fallen sword. Time was against her. Nicola was already on her feet, closing in fast. With determination, Brietta snatched her sword from the grass just as Nicola lunged once more. She raised her blade in defense, the tip poised against Natalia's throat, creating a tense stalemate between them. A moment of silence enveloped them, as Brietta felt the cold edge of Nicola's stake pressing against her own throat. A minuscule droplet of blood formed at the point of contact, reflecting the fierce bond they shared as warrior and mentor. "Survival must be your mantra," Nicola assessed, her voice low as she withdrew her stake. The compliment rested between them, an acknowledgement of Brietta's perseverance. Brietta allowed herself a fleeting smile before re-establishing her focus. "You're alive," Nicola added, a gleam of pride flickering in her eyes as she assessed her daughter, now regaining her composure. "But you must remember, constant vigilance is key." She unfolded her arms, drawing herself up tall. "Now, give me 15 laps around the castle." Brietta's expression turned stoic, her demeanor shifted. "I won," she affirmed, standing her ground and meeting Nicola's stern gaze with defiance. It was a sight to behold. Brietta, known for her fierce spirit, stood unwavering. "You did," Nicola replied, a hint of a smirk grazing her lips while pride wrapped around her like a cloak. But her gaze turned serious, piercing through Brietta's bravado. "But you lost focus. You lost your sword and showed a moment of weakness." Brietta remained silent, her head lowering instinctively at the mention of her shortcomings. "You are meant to protect Princess Evangelist," Nicola pressed, her tone sharp and direct. "You cannot afford to falter, not for a second." The words were a challenge, a reminder of the bond Brietta shared. Brietta inhaled deeply, her heart racing at the weight of her duty. The bond she shared with the princess was sacred and unbreakable. It thrummed in her veins, a bond of loyalty and protection. She was not just a knight, she was an extension of that royal lineage. As Nicola turned on her heel and strode decisively back toward the castle, Brietta took a moment to gather herself before beginning her laps. As she completed her final lap, Winded but determined, Brietta stumbled upon the princess seated on the steps, cocooned in a throw blanket that enveloped her in warmth. "Princess," Brietta greeted, breathless and tired yet proud of her accomplishment. Evangelist's vibrant green eyes flickered to Brietta's exhausted form, momentarily lingering before she squinted against the sun's brilliance. "It's quite late, isn't it?" she murmured, trying to shake off her fatigue. "Do you need assistance returning to your chamber?" Brietta inquired, arching a brow at the princess's disheveled state at such an hour. Surely Evangelist had been up far longer than intended. Evangelist raised her arms as if to be carried like a child, inciting a playful roll of Brietta's eyes. Still grinning, the knight lifted the sleepy princess effortlessly, cradling her against her side. Navigating through the winding corridors of Ivory Castle, Brietta reached Evangelist's room, gently pushing the door open with her shoulder. The other knights caught sight of the duo, their expressions a mix of amusement and admiration, as Brietta maneuvered into the chamber. After a brief tussle to place Evangelist comfortably on her bed, Brietta finally succeeded and stepped back slightly for a moment to observe. "How did I ever end up this way?" Brietta mused, the corners of her mouth lifting despite the arduous training earlier. Situating herself in bed, Evangelist snuggled into the warmth of her soft covers with a content sigh, her presence calming Brietta's hurried thoughts as she settled beside her. Despite the exhaustion, Brietta felt a swell of happiness. The burdens of the day would fade away in this tranquility. But as the princess's gaze met hers, Brietta's heart raced. There was an undeniable connection between them, one that transcended the boundaries of knight and royal. "Are you preparing for Polaris?" Brietta asked, pondering what lay ahead. "Of course," Evangelist replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. "But only if you promise to stay by my side, no matter what." Silence enveloped them as Brietta assimilated the weight of the princess's words. She locked eyes with Evangelist, seeing beyond their roles, understanding the deeper meaning of her loyalty, wrapped in the promise of companionship. "I promise," Brietta declared with quiet conviction, as an unbreakable bond seared between them, an understanding that within the realm of steel and shadows, they were united against any challenge that lay ahead. The morning sun filtered softly through the ornate windows of Evangelist's chamber, casting gentle patterns across the floor. Brietta lay awake, feeling warm in the cocoon of the blankets and the subtle presence of the princess beside her. She could hear Evangelist's steady breathing and the occasional rustle of the worn blanket as the princess shifted slightly in her sleep. Brietta knew the importance of their upcoming journey to Polaris, a place filled with uncertainty, yet brimming with promise. As Brietta rose from the bed, careful not to disturb Evangelist, she took a moment to admire the girl she had sworn to protect. The soft light highlighted Evangelist's auburn hair, cascading in waves around her shoulders. Brietta smiled to herself, remembering the bond they had formed over years of training, laughter, and shared dreams. Despite their different statuses, the friendship between them felt like an unbreakable chain, an alliance stronger than any sword. Deciding to let Evangelist sleep a little longer, Brietta ventured to the kitchen of the castle, anticipating the aroma of breakfast. She wanted to ensure the princess would have the energy for their journey and to prepare for the upcoming challenges. As she entered the kitchen, the warm waft of freshly baked bread greeted her. The castle cook, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands, was busy shaping dough at the counter. "Good morning, Sir Brietta," the cook said cheerfully, glancing up. "What can I get for the sleeping princess today?" "Good morning. Whatever will pack well for travel," Brietta replied, moving closer to the counter and helping herself to a piece of warm bread. "She'll need her strength." "And so will you, dear," the cook chuckled, pushing a plate piled high with pastries toward her. "Here, take these as well. You have no idea what lies ahead." "Thank you. I appreciate it," Brietta replied, filling her arms with the provisions. She felt a warmth in her chest at the thoughtfulness of those around them, recognizing the bond between them all within the castle walls. With an armful of food, she made her way back to the princess's room. Evangelist stirred as the door creaked open, blinking sleepily at the carpeted floor before her gaze lifted to Brietta, her eyes brightening with recognition. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Brietta said, setting the food down on the bedside table before plopping down beside her. I brought breakfast. Evangelist stretched, a content smile breaking across her face, as she propped herself up to examine the spread. You're the best, she said, her voice still thick with sleep. Now, I can't fathom how I'd ever be ready for Polaris without you. Of course you can, Brietta teased, rolling her eyes dramatically. You've been trained well to grasp whatever challenges come your way. Remember all those sessions we had under Nicola's watchful eye? You practically aced every move she threw at you, and I owe you a great deal for that. Evangelist countered gracefully, her gaze sincere. You've always believed in me when others might not have. Brietta felt a flutter in her chest at the sincerity of the princess's words. You're capable of amazing things, Eve. You just need to trust yourself. As they finished breakfast, Evangelist's expression grew serious. You know, Brietta, the journey to Polaris is going to challenge us in ways we have yet to imagine. The rumors about the werewolves and their increasing boldness. It's troubling. Brietta nodded, her thoughts mirroring the unease within Evangelist. We are prepared for what lies ahead. We've faced challenges together before, and this will be no different. Your spirit will guide us through. As they spoke, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It swung open, revealing Nicola, poised and powerful as always. She assessed the room instantly, taking in the remnants of their breakfast with a raised eyebrow. Are you two ready? We have much to discuss before the sun rises higher, she instructed, her tone leaving no room for delay. Ready as we'll ever be, Brietta said confidently, exchanging glances with Evangelist. The princess's face was serious, her determination palpable. As they followed Nicola out into the hall, Brietta felt the familiar tingle of adrenaline in her veins. The castle's corridors echoed with the sound of their footsteps, and the air felt charged with purpose. Nicola led them to a grand meeting room, overlooking the sprawling vineyards that framed their homeland. The soft hues of sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, casting an ethereal glow across the room. A large oak table was situated in the center, adorned with maps and parchments displaying the terrain they would soon traverse. Gather around, Nicola instructed, gesturing for them to take their seats. It's important we all understand the situation before we head out. As they settled into their places, Nicola began to outline their path to Polaris, the potential threats they might encounter, and strategies for engagement. Brietta listened intently. Every detail mattered, especially given the reputation of the werewolves rumored to linger in the forests surrounding Polaris. Remember, our primary objective is to ensure Princess Evangelist's safety. You both need to be vigilant but also adaptable. Not every enemy will confront you directly, Nicola advised, her eyes locking onto Brietta's. Brie, you must trust your instincts and stay an arm's length from the princess at all times. Of course, I wouldn't have it any other way, Brietta responded firmly, setting her jaw with resolve. As Nicola continued to speak, Evangelist leaned closer to Brietta, gently brushing her fingers against her hand under the table. Brietta caught her gaze, and without a word exchanged, they both knew that this journey would not only test their skills, but also reaffirm their partnership. Prepare yourselves, daughters, Nicola concluded firmly. We leave in an hour. This is your chance to shine, Brietta, and to stand by our future queen Evangelist. Stay strong and trust in each other. As the sun rose higher, Brietta felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, alongside the warmth of camaraderie. Turning to Evangelist, she squeezed the princess's hand, both knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, side by side, sword drawn, and hearts united. An hour later, the sun-bathed ivory castle in brilliant light as Brietta and Evangelist stood at the gates, ready to embark on their journey to Polaris. The air was thick with anticipation, and the faint sounds of birds chirping provided a serene backdrop to the gravity of their mission. Nicola had already mounted her steadfast stallion, a magnificent black mare that seemed to mirror her fierce spirit. Brietta tightened the strap on her sword, ensuring it was secure against her side. She stole a glance at Evangelist, whose expression was a mixture of determination and apprehension. Unable to resist, Brietta reached out and brushed a few loose strands of hair behind the princess's ear, the gesture eliciting a soft smile from Evangelist. We'll get through this, no matter what happens, Brietta promised, her voice low and steady. Evangelist nodded, her green eyes shimmering with resolve. I know we will. With a final check-in from Nicola, who demanded they remain vigilant and alert throughout their journey, the three of them set off into the expansive forest surrounding the castle, riding in a formation that kept Evangelist protected in the center. As they traveled deeper into the woodland, the sounds of nature surrounded them, but with each passing mile, Brietta felt an unsettling tension building in her chest. She scanned the trees, always on the lookout for any signs of danger. The forest appeared tranquil, yet something in the air felt different, charged, almost electric, as if an undercurrent of malevolence lurked just beyond the tree-line. After several hours of riding, they came to a clearing where the sunlight streamed down onto the underbrush, illuminating a worn path leading toward the heart of the forest. Suddenly, Nicola signaled for them to halt. Stay close to me, she warned, her voice low. We need to be cautious. Brietta's heart raced as they dismounted, the anticipation of an imminent threat setting every nerve on edge. With weapons drawn and senses heightened, they cautiously made their way down the path. Just as they began to relax, a cacophony of howling pierced the peace of the forest, sending chills down Brietta's spine. She exchanged tense glances with Evangelist, who looked equally unsettled. Stay together, Nicola commanded, moving closer to Evangelist, her stance protective. As if summoned by their shared trepidation, shadows flickered through the trees, morphing into dark figures that emerged in a rush. Werewolves. Their glowing eyes glinted dangerously in the dim light as they positioned themselves around the trio, growling with menacing hunger. Brietta took a step forward instinctively, sword at the ready. We can't let them separate us, she shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The lead werewolf lunged, and in an instant chaos erupted. Brietta swung her sword, catching the creature off guard and sending it reeling to the ground. Beside her, Nicola fought valiantly, commanding the space with fierce strikes, while Evangelist moved to the back, desperately trying to avoid the fray. Stay behind me, Brietta yelled, deflecting another attack with her blade. The fierce instinct to protect Evangelist surged within her, fueling her movements. Despite their efforts, the werewolves outnumbered them. One of the creatures knocked Brietta off balance, sending her sprawling to the ground. Before she could react, another beast was upon her, teeth bared. But just as fear threatened to consume her, she felt a surge of power and purpose. Rising to her feet, she swung her sword with newfound ferocity, parrying the attack and striking true. The creature yelped and retreated, giving Brietta a moment to breathe. As the battle raged on, Brietta glanced toward Evangelist, who stood determinedly near Nicola, despite the chaos unfolding around them. I can help, Evangelist called out, but Brietta shook her head frantically. No, stay behind us. It's too dangerous, she shouted, desperate to keep the princess safe. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the clearing as Nicola's fury unleashed. With fluid precision, Nicola fought off two werewolves simultaneously, her movements a testament to her skill. The battle became a blur of fur and flashes of steel, Brietta's focus channeling entirely on the immediate threats surrounding them. Then in a split second, a third werewolf lunged directly toward Evangelist. Time slowed as Brietta's heart nearly stopped, her instincts screaming to act. Her feet propelled her forward with all her might, and she thrust her sword directly between the two creatures, coming between the werewolf and the princess just in time. Eve, she shouted, catching the werewolf's attention fully on her. Brietta turned to face it, her heart racing but her resolve unyielding. Stay behind me. With a ferocity born from sheer determination, Brietta engaged the beast, blocking its vicious lunges and countering with calculated strikes. Finally, using every ounce of strength and skill she possessed, she managed to land a critical blow, sending the werewolf stumbling back and then retreating into the shadows. The remaining creatures soon realized they were being outmatched. One by one, they fled, howling in defeat as they vanished back into the depths of the forest. Panting, Brietta stood guard, scanning the area for any lingering threats. A moment passed, and then she turned to Evangelist, her heart racing with both adrenaline and fear. Are you all right? Brietta asked, breathless but relieved, approaching the princess. Evangelist nodded, though her face was pale and wide-eyed with worry. I'm fine, thanks to you. You saved me. Brietta brushed aside the praise, the adrenaline still pulsing through her. We fought together. We always do, she answered, feeling a mix of pride and protectiveness swell in her chest. Nicola joined them, her expression fierce yet scrutinizing. You both fought well, she said, acknowledging their resolve. But don't let your guard down. This was only a skirmish. The journey is far from over. Regaining her composure, Brietta stepped forward. We'll be ready, whatever comes next. Evangelist placed a hand on Brietta's arm, her gaze steadfast. We will get through this. Together. Reassured by their unwavering bond, Brietta nodded, feeling the weight of the world lift just a little. They continued on the path toward Polaris, the promise of the journey ahead lighting their spirits amid the looming shadows of uncertainty. As the sun began to dip on the horizon, painting the sky in stunning hues of orange and purple, the trio pressed onward, determined to face whatever awaited them. With swords at the ready and hearts intertwined, they knew the strength of their bond would guide them through the darkest of trials. Together as knight and princess, they would conquer the world ahead, unyielding and fiercely loyal.